Hi, I'm Nikki Whiting. I'm the Managing Director here at Bulletproof. Today we're going to have a chat with Dom, our red teaming specialist, to talk about red teaming, what it is, where it's applicable to different organisations, and just generally give you some information that may be helpful to help you understand what it's all about. So Dom, welcome.
Hello.
So red teaming, it's a term that gets bandied around a lot. It's becoming more popular as a term. We're hearing more about it. What is it?
I think there ends up being a lot of confusion around red teaming. And we're probably kind of our own worst enemy on this in terms of how we've marketed red teaming and how we push it. There tends to be a lot of confusion and overlap between things like red teaming and penetration testing. And they're not the same thing. So they both have different goals, different outcomes, different approaches, and they're both viable testing approaches for different organizations, but each one fills kind of its own niche. So with red teaming, it's predominantly adversarial. We're looking to test assumptions. We're kind of doing everything we can to emulate a real threat against a real organization and seeing how they respond and how viable their response is. And then we evaluate them based on that. Whereas penetration testing, obviously, we're looking at massive vulnerabilities and kind of validating them almost like an audit. That's, in my opinion, probably one of the primary differences and drivers would be that initial goal-based adversarial approach to red teaming. And also, I guess, kind of one of the fundamentals, the reason it is called red teaming, would be the differences between red team and blue team. So we exist to support the blue team. So without realistically a direct opposite in the blue team to train, enhance, and kind of improve, a red team doesn't function as well. So that's kind of a key importance.
So a blue team is the other side of the fence.
Yeah, so a defensive team.
So the idea is that they learn from what the red team's doing to provide that defensive shield. Yeah,
exactly that. So one of the primary outcomes of kind of a red team will be things like a wash-up or training exercise that we often hold with the blue team. And, the detection recommendations we include in reports, all of that stuff goes towards making the blue team better. And it doesn't have to be an in-house blue team. We've worked with managed detection and response providers from like various different organizations that might be embedded within the organization we're testing. And ultimately, we're looking at ways of closing down their detection gaps, closing down blind spots, and allowing them to defend themselves better. And that might be in the form of detection, it might be in the form of, process responses, the way they're handling things, doing things. So it can be quite broad.
And there's the terms black teaming and purple teaming. So what's black teaming and purple teaming then?
All the colours of the teaming. So like one of the primary ways we've kind of broken it down here at Bulletproof, and a lot of other places do as well, is having within red team services, there tends to be different areas or different focuses. So you've got your classic red team, which tends to be usually an outside in to achieve certain goals, deliver and show impact of a particular attack or a threat to an organization based on that kind of threat profile and what's appropriate. And that tends to be the classic full-scale red team. So that can sometimes include physical aspects, if that's within scope of what's appropriate for the client. Some organizations, some industries are more susceptible to a physical threat than they might be to a digital threat, and that needs to be kind of accounted for. So sometimes that can form part of it, but then black teaming on its own is primarily focused on physical. So the black team in isolation will look for physical means of ingress, ways of showing impact of potential physical security mechanisms, so removing stock, data protection, physical location protection, things like data centers, stuff like that can really benefit. And then you have things like purple teaming. So purple teaming is a blend of blue and red. So we work quite closely, and how we deliver these here would be we work with a SOC or a third party or a protection provider. We carry out a series of tests based on TTPs or certain threat groups, and we say, can the defensive side, can they see it? Can they block it? Is it detected, but there's no alert for it, but it's detected, but there's telemetry available for it? And we can kind of give them the criteria and allow them to see across the board, actually, out of these 50 TTPs we tested, we've got really good detection mechanisms for, say, 20% of them, and we need to improve in these areas, and then we've got no complete blind spots in other areas. So that's how purple teaming kind of fits in, and it's much safer, and I'd say not necessarily easier to deliver, but it's more compressed to deliver over like a classic red team. You can get a lot of that detection information without having to go through, I guess, the initial time and effort to build like a full-scale assessment. It removes some of the realism, but you get a trade-off in kind of speed of delivery.
Okay, so red teams tend to happen over a longer period of time than, say, a traditional penetration test that might happen over a few days.
Yes, so they're time intensive, they're resource intensive, and they're kind of technologically expensive in terms of, the expertise and the requirements to deliver them now against sophisticated environments is considerably higher than it probably was, when I started like 3-4 years ago. So they tend to be over a longer period of time. Things like initial access and all that attack planning, landing those phishing emails, finding the kind of breaching the perimeter and getting in and up and operating against a sophisticated environment takes time. But everything is fluid. So the scenarios we look to design can, range from 10-day engagements all the way up to 3, 4, 5-month engagements. So the scope of a red team isn't so much defined often by the size of an organisation, but more by the complexity, amount, and differing objectives. I'd say tends to be more of a limiter.
Yeah. So it's about what they want to get out of it.
Yeah, exactly that. Whatever the client wants to show or to highlight is kind of going to be the driving aim of the engagement. Likewise, sometimes if you're doing like threat emulation, we might be following, a particular set of objectives that a group would go for. So a ransomware group is going to always look to get as high as it can, as quick as it can in order to deliver its ransomware. Someone like a espionage group or corporate espionage group might be looking to stay in an environment for a long period of time, monitor, exfiltrate, intellectual property. That might change the objectives and approach and timelines and deliveries. But ultimately, it's all dictated by client requirements and obviously budgets.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that sometimes you get clients, or we get clients that come to us and they don't really know what they need. So is there's guidance you can provide, sort of common objectives that you might help an organisation think about in terms of, they know they need red teaming, but they don't quite know what they want to do in terms of their objectives. So is there sort of a guidance you can give them on that?
Yeah, so I think some of the common ways we approach it when we go through the kind of scoping exercises and the engagement building and scenario development kind of meetings we have with a client, one of the key things we always try to get to the bottom of is what is, I guess, like the classic crown jewels. Yeah. What keeps you up at night? What are the areas you really want us to focus in on in terms of, if an attacker got access to X, Y, and Z data or certain systems or people, it would have a serious and detrimental impact to the organisation. And that's what we try to help a client get to the bottom of. A lot of people come in and just say, our AD is really important or something like that. And you're like, okay, that's not quite the crux of it. What in your AD is important? What does AD allow you to get to that is important? And we start to sort of go down to that. So if you can come to a red team brief knowing exactly what you want out of the engagement and in terms of what is your key concern, things that are really worrying you, or you feel you might have, quite often is the case, you might have feel you're excelling in certain areas and you want that verified. Various justifications, sometimes for additional funding, something like that. If you come to the meeting with those in mind, we can help design scenarios to support or show the lack of within that. So it's all very bespoke. It's very rare you get like cookie cutter engagements. What works for one works for everyone else. Because we have like a sliding maturity scale as well, I guess, for clients. So quite often you'll get clients come that might want a red team but aren't ready for it. So that's something else we kind of work with them as well. Building towards doing proper red teaming and actions we can do to support that. So
what type of organisations would be ready for a red team, given what you just said there?
Yeah. So I guess kind of there's a few key areas, and like I said, we got kind of that range of services. So everything from full red teams down to things like assume breach and EDR kind of scenarios. So we can slot in kind of adversarial testing and approaches into different sort of maturity levels of organizations, and they're still going to get useful results. But I'd say to be going for like a full red team, like I mentioned, a red team is a direct opposite to a blue team. So you want something like a managed detection and response provider. You want to have an in-house kind of SOC team. You want to be using XDR, SDR, SOC SIEM, all of the various kind of protection frameworks that we can provide you with extra information for that you're going to be able to use. So, if we're giving you detection recommendations for tooling and approaches we're doing, if you have no means, if you can't detect it and you can't implement those changes, then you're going to be losing out. Also, like again, I guess kind of branching back to the differences, we might not be looking for every vulnerability. We're going to be quite laser focused in terms of what we need to do to achieve our objectives. So, like a common example I give is, we might see a vulnerability during a red team, but we're not going to move to exploit it because it doesn't gain us anything.
Doesn't meet your objective.
Yeah, it doesn't meet our objective, doesn't get us closer to where we need to go, so why should we go for it? If I can achieve all my objectives of, say, getting to financial information by compromising a single low-level user and never having to privilege escalate, winner, I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the least path to resistance and I'm going to do it.
So that helps to distinguish the difference between a pen test and a red team in some ways, doesn't it? Because you're going for a specific objective as opposed to just looking at all the vulnerabilities.
Yeah, depth, breadth, like kind of approach.
But I'm guessing some of the techniques are the same. It's just you're looking at it from a different point of view.
Yeah. Some of the techniques are the same with kind of differing considerations. So that's a kind of it's almost a whole different way that red teaming has to think. We have to work within the confines and context of a network. There's been quite a few good blogs on it, a lot of good posts about, penetration testing makes a number of assumptions, that you're going to land on a network, you're going to land in an accepted network with Kali, you're going to be able to have all the tools you need to do, whereas red teaming, you almost start with nothing and have to build that out. So you have to bring your tooling with you, you have to work within the confines of protection, you have to work within the confines of their network, which is great in terms of reporting because you get all that additional information, so you see how that all works. But I'd say vulnerability management, again, is another key underpinning bit of maturity. If you're having regular pen tests and you're carrying out vulnerability management, you should kind of already know where your bad spots are. And you don't need the red team to come in and tell you, oh, you haven't patched this server and whatever. You know it's going to be vulnerable, but the red team might show you, yes, it's vulnerable, and actually we did use it in the red team and we actually managed to steal all your financial data because of it. So there's your impact. Whereas pen testing might be like, there's your vulnerability. And then it's up to you whether you go away and do something about it or not. I'll put it on a risk register, But we can actually show you, putting on the risk register might not be enough because it leads to this. So
is it almost like the next step, really, for a lot of organisations? Because I kind of get that feeling that, when we talk to customers, a lot of customers have been doing penetration testing for a long time. They do it every year, they come back every year, they do another test, they fix their vulnerabilities and then they go away again. But and I think there is a bit of an appetite now for companies. It's like, well, what's next?
What's more?
Obviously, I guess is one of the what's next things that we can do for organisations in terms of. But as you've said, there's no point doing it if they haven't got the frameworks internally to actually detect and monitor their own environments.
So exactly. That's always one of the questions I've sometimes asked when we're talking to clients, would be like, what are your last pen test results? Quite often you see exactly as you said, you have clients, say, doing an internal infrastructure assessment and they've had the same test for 3 years, they've had the same rough results and they expect the same thing every year. And you're like, well, why do you just keep doing the same thing? Like, should we look at this in a different way? Should we apply a scenario to it? Should we widen the scope? Should we change things? And taking that next step can be, that's pretty, I'd say predominantly where like things like assume breach sit. So assume breach I've got a real soft spot for assume breach testing. I think it's probably one of the best value versus delivery kind of approaches because you can lump it in with normal penetration testing. So you could have your normal unauthenticated pen test, internal, external, whatever, and then you can add on assume breach. So rather than doing your classic or your authenticated testing where you're going to be checking things like patch levels and stuff like that, which you might already have an eye on, you might already have a Nessus license already in your enterprise. You do your own scans. Okay, there's 300 missing Google Chrome third-party patches. It's not really a priority for you. You're working through them, but fine. You don't need to be told that by a testing provider. So with an assume breach, we can say, okay, let's give us access to a machine. Let's detonate a payload in the same way it would come through an email or whatever, and we'll work from that scenario, saying this single user is compromised, how can we go on from there?
How far can you go?
Yeah, and then we'll test your defense in depth approaches, and you get that same feedback, the same reporting style that you would do with the full red team, but without all that initial extra time, extra effort of things like initial access and all of that. So they can be covert still, so they can be delivered with the defensive team not knowing. We might ask for like a sneaky account to be created, a laptop to be provided, and we'll go from there. Or they can be delivered alongside, almost like a purple team, where they know what's going on and they use it as much for training as we do. So again, very flexible in delivery, but I'd say assume breach is that real good stopgap and that hop before then moving on to things like full red teams. And then once you've probably done some penetration testing, you've done assume breaches, you might want to do some more time-intensive testing. You might want to say, look, let's really branch out and see potential other avenues that attackers might get in. Let's go for a full red team and see what we can do.
Do you find there's any common findings that you see when you do red teamings? Is there any sort of common themes? I mean, we know when we do pen testing, there are very common themes that we see in a lot of organisations, but is it the same with red teaming?
In some ways, yes. Sometimes it feels like you're a glorified bin diver. We spend a lot of time in red teaming going through file shares, going through information, because often that's the first thing we'll get access to as a user or as a person within an organisation. We need to learn more about how the organisation operates. So we need to look at their internal processes and what they're doing in order to try and kind of maybe find ways in. If we need to get into their financial systems, how are they sharing information in and out of the systems? Do they have certain protocols? Are there certain controls? Do they have secure upload functions, that we need to look at in order to get where we need to go? Without having to worry about things like endpoint protection, we might be able to find an entirely easier route. So people leaving things lying around is a big one. We find it a lot in scripts, in documentation. I think I had one where it was a welcome presentation that had their closed server network passwords on. And everything on like a welcome presentation on a PowerPoint presentation just saved in OneDrive. So things like that we find regularly. And then probably the biggest one, which is probably the hardest to get right, but it's kind of one of those basics I think we bang on about a lot, is like privilege separation and segregation. Having service level accounts, your higher admin level accounts, your domain admins, your global admins, and all of that stuff, and actually separating them off. We often find once we can move around fairly freely, we identify who an admin is by their normal account. Lo and behold, we go to their machine and we get access to their machine, and they're signing into their Azure, they're signing into their AWS. They've got everything we need there, and we can move. The blurred lines between bringing your own devices and now everyone having basically keys to the kingdom stored in their browser has made things different but the same. So before we used to be, stealing hashes and login information from a local machine. Now we do that from a browser and we go straight into your cloud systems and whatever. So the boundaries move around, but fundamentals kind of remain the same, and that's something we see a lot of. So
it's about humans not following process or not having the process and procedure in place, which comes down to things like compliance. But so are there any disadvantages from red teaming? Because when you hear about pen testing, people can be a bit touchy. Is it going to affect my network? Are we going to lock people out? Is it going to cause a problem? Are there any sort of disadvantages to red teaming?
I guess in terms of the risks, they're always going to be there. Red teaming, we make an active effort to work within the confines of the system. So there's always the inherent risk of everything we're doing in pen testing and red teaming to cause issues, because we're using things in a way more often than not they're not designed to be. But I think the biggest pros and cons are differences in why you choose them. If you want to find out all of your vulnerabilities in a network and give you your CVSS scores and all of that stuff, then penetration testing is for you. If you go to get a red team and you're expecting that same results, you're gonna be disappointed. I think where they have their own individual strengths and merits are where also their weaknesses are. In a red team, we're very focused. I might make a note and provide you some information around, okay, when we were moving around, we saw X, Y, and Z, which you should probably patch up or sort out. But I didn't directly exploit them because it might put my operation at risk. Whereas in a pen test, you've got 5 days, go mad, find everything you can, as wide as you can, run all the scans, shout as loud as you can. So there, I think the primary trade-offs and probably negative points of each. Penetration testing, vast amounts of information spread across your entire network. Prioritizing it can sometimes be quite hard. Red teaming, considerably more focused, aims to deliver prioritization because you can clearly see, actually, if I don't fix these 3 things in this attack chain, then my entire organization might be at risk. So it gives you better prioritization, probably more focused information.
Yeah, it's more targeted, and if an organisation understands where its risks are, then it's good from that point of view.
Yeah.
Whereas if an organisation hasn't really thought about that, then that's going to be more difficult, as you say, when you're going to have to coach them into finding out where the risk is.
And often we end up finding out more about, during a red team, particularly the ones who operate over a longer period of time, we tend to find out more about the organisation than sometimes even the people who are initially scoping the red team know.
Yeah.
We might find domains that have been registered by various members of other departments, or marketing domains that have suddenly been spun up. I think like a good one I saw was speaking to the SOC manager. I was like, do you know about this recruitment portal that's popped up that's allowing submissions of job applications that we were obviously at the time putting like malicious documents through? And he was like, nope, no, it's it never come through him. It hadn't been enrolled in their systems properly.
Yeah.
So they had no idea that literally there was an entire upload portal just allowing submission directly through to their HR teams, and that were all being verified and opened or whatever on their devices, and it hadn't gone through any of their proper systems. So often we can find things that they don't know about and help them
fix their change control process.
Help them fix that, and just surface some of these things, because we have to learn a lot about an organisation doing the red team. We have to fill in a lot of blanks and like I said, dive through their documentation. It's one of my pastimes, is reading other organisations' documentation for how they're doing stupid things, or sometimes very good things. But we have to understand more about how they operate than they do in order to deliver it. So it can be quite handy.
Yeah. Lastly, if there was a top tip you could give to companies who are thinking about red teaming, what would it be?
Know what you want. If you can even have a bit of an inkling in terms of what you want to get out of a red team, it can really help us shape and deliver something for you that's going to be, I wouldn't say like special, but it's going to really help you in reinforcing your goals and what you want to achieve. Because ultimately that's what we're there for. If you've got a new up and coming SOC team, and you really want to help them get better, we can start at a lower level and work up, and year on year, that's one of the best things I think with red team is you end up making quite a good relationship often with your counterpart team, because you might come back year on year, and as they improve, you have to kind of pull your socks up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you get left behind. As the defences are going up, if you're not picking up with them, you're going to reach that level where you're getting absolutely slaughtered by their detections every time. So it can be quite good. And in a lot of parts of the industry where we don't always see the returns on our efforts, it can be quite nice working up with a team. So know what you want, identify your weak spots, and help us test them or help them kind of work through with it. Also, I think just understanding and being aware of the differences is key, as we kind of talked about. A lot of people don't know those differences, so do a bit of research, find out what you want.
Watch this video.
Watch this video. Listen to me rabble on, and you can again help the whole process through. When we're working in red teams, we work really closely with you, or be in constant contact. It's not like you probably see in like the movies or how a lot of people have this idea of red teaming, that we hire a team, they do whatever they can, and they disappear for 6 months and then reappear saying, haha, we got everything. Like, no, we're in constant contact with you. Yeah. We, if we feel that we can improve the engagement or deliver extra value in certain areas where we are, we'll talk to you about it, we'll do it. We are flexible with that. Get used to working with us. But that, I think, is the crux, realistically.
That's great.
No worries.
Thank you for your time, Dom. It's been really interesting.
Thank you.